Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a massive structural shift that's happening right now, one that's completely rewiring global commerce.
We're talking about the automotive supply chain.
Exactly. For what, 40 years, the whole industry ran on one simple rule: pure efficiency. Just-in-time delivery, lowest cost no matter where it came from.
And that paradigm is completely over. Our sources are all pointing to the same thing. Decisions that used to be about efficiency are now all about national strategy, geopolitical alignment.
It's a huge change. And we're going to focus on the really aggressive moves from the U.S. automakers because this isn't, a gentle suggestion.
Not at all. We're talking about hard corporate directives.
And the big one is from General Motors. We're seeing that GM has told thousands of its suppliers they need to systematically strip China out of their North American supply chains.
It's an incredible order, really. And the timeline is what's so stunning. Sources confirm they started sending out this directive in late 2024.
And the deadline they set?
2027. A hard deadline. By then, certain key suppliers have to completely end their purchasing relationships with any Chinese partners for their North American business.
3 years. To unravel a network that's been integrated for decades, that sounds like an operational nightmare. I mean, GM CEO Mary Barra says it's about resilience, sourcing locally.
Right.
But is that even feasible?
It's incredibly difficult. But what you have to understand is this didn't just happen overnight. The planning for this started way back in 2023. They knew they had to start with the biggest choke points.
Which would be?
The high-value stuff. So semiconductors, battery raw materials, and the really tough one, rare earths. You can't just change everything at once. You have to start there.
Okay, let's dive into those choke points. Semiconductors, chips, that seems like the obvious place to start. The post-COVID chip shortage just laid bare how vulnerable the entire industry was.
That was the strategic foundation for all of this. So in February 2023, GM signs a long-term agreement with GlobalFoundries.
A major American chip manufacturer.
Exactly. And the deal was explicitly about securing capacity, inside a domestic supply line.
And the detail there is fascinating, isn't it? GlobalFoundries actually reserved production capacity at its big plant in New York just for GM's suppliers.
It's not just a purchase order. It's basically a security agreement that's geographically targeted.
And that's directly tied to government policy, I assume?
Oh, absolutely. This was really only possible because of the USCHEPS and Science Act. That's the $52 billion meant to bring chip manufacturing back to the U.S.
So if chips were phase one, what's next? Because we're seeing this huge bet on battery raw materials, something like $9.5 billion in planned investments.
It's a monumental shift. When you spend that kind of money up front, you're not thinking about just-in-time anymore.
No, you're thinking just in case.
Precisely. And the strategy is all about North America and, allied countries. The best example is that October 2024 joint venture with Lithium Americas.
The Canadian miner developing the Thacker Pass mine in Nevada.
Right. And the scale of that project is intended to secure nearly 20 years of lithium supply just for GM's U.S. battery production. It's a massive move.
So they're trying to bypass China's dominance in processing all these critical minerals.
Exactly. Cobalt from Glencore, nickel from Australia. It's all about building a parallel supply chain.
But this is where they hit a wall, right? The question of rare earths and the magnets you need for EV motors, China just controls so much of that market.
It's the biggest bottleneck by a mile. I mean, GM saw this coming. Way back in 2021, they partnered with MP Materials in the U.S. and Vacuum Schmelz in Germany to build magnet plants here.
And MP's plant in Texas was supposed to be a big deal?
Huge. The idea was to support 500,000 EVs a year using domestic materials starting this year, 2024.
But that's the catch, isn't it? Even if you build the plant here, where do the raw, processed rare earth actually come from?
And that's the contradiction our sources point out. Even with these plants, MP Materials still, in the short term, has to rely on China for a lot of the complex processing.
So you can build the house, but the foundation is still coming from the same place.
It shows you why this is so hard. You can't just move a factory. You have to move the entire chemical and mining value chain. It takes years.
Okay, let's pivot to the other big U.S. players. So GM is trying to control everything from the mine up. How does Ford's situation compare? It seems like they're much more focused on the battery tech itself.
Right, which brings us to the CATL controversy in 2023.
This was Ford partnering with the giant Chinese battery maker, CATL, to build an LFP battery plant in Michigan.
Yes, for the cheaper iron-based batteries. But the structure of the deal, where Ford owned the plant but licensed the Chinese tech, that's what set off alarms.
The political scrutiny in Washington was immediate. Lawmakers were asking if this was just a way to get Chinese technology onto U.S. soil.
Exactly. And under all that pressure, Ford had to start scrambling for alternatives, trying to find U.S. or allied suppliers so they could qualify for those Inflation Reduction Act tax credits.
And this is where their strategy really showed its weakness. Unlike GM, Ford hadn't invested upstream in rare earths, which led directly to that production halt for the Explorer in May 2025.
That's the perfect example. A single component, a permanent magnet, stopped a multi-billion-dollar assembly line cold. It showed just how fragile the system is.
And meanwhile, you've got Tesla, the biggest EV maker, making its own moves.
Very similar moves. They also told suppliers to replace China origin parts for their U.S.-built cars.
Yeah.
And they signed that massive $43 billion deal with LG Energy Solution for LFP batteries.
So they're all accelerating their own De-Chinafication.
They are. But we have to do a reality check here, because for all this strategic maneuvering, economics still exist.
The cost reality check.
Yes, a lot of Chinese components are still used globally simply because they cost less. And in some areas, the technology is just better or more mature.
And the Renault example from our sources illustrates that perfectly.
It does. Renault cancels a project with a European partner to develop a rare earth-free motor, which sounds like the perfect geopolitical answer.
Right. The ideal solution.
But instead, they just went with a cheaper, off-the-shelf Chinese supplier. The immediate cost advantage was just too good to pass up, despite the long-term risk.
It's like they're playing two different games at once. Which brings us to the view from China itself. How are the U.S. companies even doing there, and how is the public reacting to all this?
Well, the market share numbers are pretty tough. GM's share dropped to around 8 or 9% in 2023. Ford's is even smaller, like 1.6%.
The domestic Chinese brands are just taking over.
They really are. But here's a weird little anomaly. Ford, despite those tiny sales numbers, still managed to earn $600 million in profit from its China operations in 2024.
How is that even possible?
They streamlined everything. They cut the models that were losing money and started exporting China-built Fords and Lincolns. It shows they're not trying to win in China anymore. They're just optimizing a withdrawal.
So with that clear intent to pull back, what are Chinese consumers and commentators saying? There must be a lot of debate.
Oh, it's fascinating. You see a clear split in the reactions.
Right.
On one side, you have these market pragmatists.
Yeah.
They basically say, you know what? Our domestic market has too much capacity. The competition is insane. A shakeout is probably necessary.
So a sort of self-correction view.
Right. But then you have the complete opposite, a much more nationalist reaction.
Calls for reciprocity.
Exactly. The argument is, if GM is cutting our suppliers, then Chinese consumers should cut GM products. It even escalates to calls for reverse decoupling.
Meaning China should proactively de-GMify its own industry.
Yes, reconsider the whole joint venture structure, but then you also get this really sophisticated political take.
The more balanced view.
Yeah, where people point out that every country tries to localize its industry. They say the U.S. is just now imitating China's old market for technology policies. They see it for what it is, an expression of political power, not just market economics.
So if we pull all this together, the core conflict seems crystal clear. U.S. automakers are racing to localize their North American supply chains by that 2027 deadline.
They are, driven by national policy. But at the same time, they are still functionally reliant on Chinese components where there's a cost or tech advantage.
Like that Renault example showed.
Exactly. You can't escape it overnight.
And this whole structural shift is forcing these massive corporations into a really difficult position. They have to localize in North America to de-risk, but they also have to maintain a presence in the Chinese market. They're being forced to build two parallel supply chains.
Which brings us to the big question, the one for you to really think about after this deep dive is over. What happens to all the global efficiency gains we've made over the last 40 years when companies have to build redundant, expensive, parallel supply networks on opposite sides of a geopolitical fault line?
What does that kind of dual localization mean for the cost of everything you buy, especially cars in the long run? A powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the changing world of automotive supply chains.